very much.
Great, and thank you, Mr. Savage, and particularly thank you for bringing up the issue of portables. There's a lot of schools still use portables. As I mentioned, I just left one, and go into a portable full of 40 seniors right after lunch, and doesn't smell too healthy in there, right? The air quality isn't at a premium, I can assure you of that. And it's tight, and it's hard to conduct certain types of learning when you've got that tight of an environment. So thank you for your presentation. I want to just back up to the macro level here. Could you, because as part of this is to educate the committee, just to talk about a school bond for sure, but also to educate the committee, could you just walk us through on a macro level the difference and the similarities between modernization money and new school construction money?
Well, new school construction money is identified to house additional students and provide capacity for classroom seats, other minimum essential facilities, other types of facilities to house, to accommodate growth in students. And modernization funding from the state level, when it's combined with local funding, is essentially to upgrade systems, finishes, all the components that go into the school, information technology, backbone, etc. One of the other things that modernization funding does, and it's a place that many districts are ending up now, and it's what we call replacement modernization. And I was a facilities director at West Contra Costa Unified School District for many years before this, and we ended up replacing our schools because they were in such bad condition, they had outlived their useful life. And so modernization by replacement is becoming one of the key points where we're ending up throughout the state. Unfortunately, as you can imagine, this is an expensive proposition. And so it takes a significant local commitment far beyond the modernization funding that's available from the state. But what I found in working in not just West Contra Costa, but the other districts that I work in, is that the state funding, even if it might be only 15% in many cases for the districts I was in, of the total funds that the districts put into the project, it's a key component. It allows the districts to meet their needs and to be able to really upgrade the facilities in a way that makes them suitable for the next generation of learners.
So, Mr. Savage, given that you have a significant history at the local and state level with regard to school facilities, can you give us, the committee, some history on what happened before 1998 with the provision of school facilities? Just some historical perspective.
Well, I've got a lot of white hair, but I wasn't around. Well, I mean, the school facilities programs that we had in place before the SFP were the lease purchase program, and going even further back, we had periods where the state was providing loans even only, and districts were funding facilities on their own. And the lease purchase program was in the 80s and 90s, and it was a program that was based on square foot costs with a much more tight process for receiving and processing applications. And part of the impetus for adopting the school facility program was to create a per pupil grant amount that basically said to school districts, okay, here's your money, go build your school. Okay? Don't bring us a lot of anything. We don't need to see it as you go. We don't need to see your bids. We don't want to get involved in that. Take your per pupil grant, build your school facilities. And so that's one of the key fundamental differences between where we were before this program and where we are now. Hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
Yes, it does. So given the current program, let's assume we had bond money now, would you consider the existing program successful?
I would consider it to be very successful, and it's really met a lot of the needs that we've had for new construction. The state has contributed through 3 of the programs that Ms. Silverman mentioned over $20 billion for new construction. The program has provided over $3.5 billion to buy land to build new schools. The program has provided over $3 billion for financial hardship districts, for districts that can't meet their match, that are low wealth districts, or that have need beyond the ability of the local voters to provide that. So We've provided an array of funding, and the program has been very successful. If I took the opportunity to take the next step, do I think that we should consider some changes to the program? I do, and I think we have some different conditions now. Don't want to get into that particularly, but it's been a successful program. We're in a different period, and we're coming out of a period of really strong, heavy student enrollment growth, and we're facing, again, the need to modernize our facilities and still provide new construction funding where it occurs in California.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one question for Ms. Silverman. Would you consider the existing program successful?
I mean, we have some outcomes in the program. Obviously there's lots of challenges that we have on a first-in, first-out basis. So we've addressed some of those program challenges in our program review subcommittee that the State Allocation Board has hosted over the last 18 months. So all those issues were addressed during the program review subcommittee.
So the program worked as designed?
It worked as designed, but there's also the ability for, if it doesn't fit in the box, the district has the ability to raise those issues to the State Allocation Board. And so there's an avenue or option for them to get their funding approved or denied because it didn't necessarily fit within the program requirements.
I understand. Good. Thank you. And I appreciate that we have that flexibility when we need it. And again, you spoke to the fact that, hey, maybe there needs to be some tweaks to the existing program, and those can be talked about going forward. So thank you. With that, Mr. Chavez.
Mr. Savage, so I can understand your last chart, number 11, the $9.18 billion for the current and projected. If I heard you right, this is an estimate, right?
Yes, sir.
And it's based not, if I heard you right earlier in the discussion, you don't have a process or system where you have the life cycle of the buildings across the state. Is that correct?
That's correct. And typically local districts would do those kinds of calculations. What they're called facility condition assessments, and you'd create a facility condition index which looks at the remaining system life and the total replacement value, and you create an index that would give you an ability to compare between schools and to determine which schools might have the highest priority, the oldest systems, the greatest need for upgrade and modernization.
Should we have a system at the state to allow a standardization so we can look at the life cycle of the buildings?
I think that I would say there are many states that do that, and in a state the size of California, it's a daunting task. I think one of the first pieces we should consider is at least having an inventory of our school facilities. We don't even have an inventory now, and we don't really know how many square feet we have at the state level. So that seems to me to be a really great first step. Part of the approach to doing it might be the information can flow up from the school districts. As a facilities director in a district, you always know, you always have the information there. You know how many square feet you have. You know your buildings. You know your site acreage. You know all that stuff. In the period we now are in, with the ability to upload that to a web portal, not that it doesn't take any time at all, but it is a much simpler task than it's ever been. So we certainly would have that capability.
I think that'd be a very good process. Maybe later on we could talk about it, because I come from an organization that had a lot of buildings. It was called the Department of Defense. I think much larger in California, and we have that capability. Mm-hmm. So especially because we're going to go to the voters, and we need to have not an emotional appeal, but actually a factual appeal. So maybe later on we could talk about that. Ms. Silverman, what I'm interested in from your position is that how do you manage this? In particular, do you have some matrix or some way that you're looking at and seeing how districts are effectively spending the money that we send to them? Keeping in mind that, one of the things I noticed when I was in my other job running around the state, you could be in Fresno, Bakersfield, Los Angeles, or San Diego, and you see that little standard building that was built at the end of World War II when we were just booming as a population, and it was the same standard little structure of a elementary school. And I'm wondering now, have we given the authority down to different school districts to make their own unique buildings? So that would mean we'd be paying architects to design buildings multiple times, or do we have a standard that we come out with? And is there a design build process, or how do we effectively know we're spending our money to build these? How do you know that?
Well, the requirement of the program is we don't get into the design. There's a lot of flexibility from the local level that they could design their own building. So every area may have unique circumstances. As far as the budget's concerned, their own budget, there's some programs that, so if a district sought for state funding, in which they're asking for state assistance, what we call a financial hardship program, and the state does participate in that program, there is no savings. So you may have a limited budget in which the state will provide you, but you can't exceed that budget. So when it comes back, the reporting requirements, again, that you have to build your project, yes, it's very important you do, but the expenditures, we get an expenditure report from the districts as far as what the final project costs are. Those final project costs will be, again, a delineation of the scope of the work and the appropriate expenditures, but it doesn't necessarily provide limits in certain areas of cost. So, again, it's just based on what the project scope was eligible for, whether or not it included land, whether or not it included other areas or subset of the grants, but again, there's no limits on, to some extent, if you are a participant of your own money, 50-50 match, there is no limits on what you can spend on your project.
But have you ever had a conversation, let's say with CBIA, for example, and say, to build that school in Bakersfield versus build that school in San Diego, there's a different cost because of the processes are different in two different superintendents. Have you ever gone to look at that element before?
We've gone to different schools throughout the state, and some of them may, again, geographical areas may have obviously higher costs, but because it's based on a per pupil grant, again, that provides them a lot of flexibility in what they can spend their money on, but there is no caps or limits on when they want to spend their local funds on.
That may be a weakness we need to look at. Last thing is, I'm big in energy efficiency. I'm going to be attending a meeting later on today about the base realignment and energy costs in the Department of Defense. In the military, they've been able to save around 20% of their operational costs. If you look at a building, a building is basically a machine, right? Remember, we learned that in our class. It's a machine. And so it's not just the structure itself, the maintenance structure, it's the operation of the structure, but through different efficiencies, we can have a lower cost to run the machine. Have you seen any return in your investments? Because you were talking about energy efficiencies that you're putting out. Can you give us a number on how much money we've been saving by these efficiencies? Like the DOD has, 20%?
Yeah, the challenge with addressing your question is there is no program response, meaning like an audit that comes back to our program to share with the program how much energy they saved. So even though we may have awarded grant money to address energy efficiency, there is no outcome base where there is a reporting back to the state of how much energy or savings they've achieved. So unfortunately, we don't have that type of data to share with you.
That would also probably help us sell a bond because everybody has a house and everybody knows why they want to have a solar thing on the top. And businesses, you go talk to them. Every business, manufacturing plant you go in the state of California, there'll be a room showing how much it costs to run that place. So we need to probably have the same, I would recommend the same sort of management process as we go ask and raise this how much was that, billions of dollars? 9.18 billion. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kim.
This is more, I think, Mr. Savage, yes. I think in your presentation I heard you acknowledging that the state has virtually no data regarding existing facilities and projected facilities needs. So my question to you is a follow-up, and you probably have answered this already, but for clarification, I want to ask this anyway. Should any new bond proposed contain a provision requiring applicants to provide a full inventory of existing school facilities and a projection of future facilities needs, including modernization needs? Would that be helpful for calculating the level of future needs?
I believe it would be, and it's one of the recommendations, one part of that, the inventory portion, was recommended by the State Allocation Board's Program Review Subcommittee as they looked at the overall program and some of the ways that we could tweak it. It was one of their recommendations to do an inventory. You know, as you implement a new state bond, part of the process, I think, will be the reestablishment of eligibility, and through the eligibility reestablishment process, districts that play in the program would be submitting information that would effectively populate the statewide inventory. And so it would be a fairly a process similar, which we went through in 1998, but on paper at that time and hard copies. So anyway, yes, in answer to your question.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Thurman? Mr. Thurman?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Silverman and Mr. Savage, for the presentation. Good to see you again, Mr. Savage. In all the years that we worked together, I always wondered how this worked. You could have told me back then. But one thing that was clear then and is clear now, school districts, as you all know, don't have any money in their general funds to do any kind of modernization, and certainly not to build a new school. So, there's no question that these dollars have provided a critical need for our school districts. What I'd like to ask is about just a little bit about some of the nuts and bolts. Ms. Silverman, you talked about some of the balances that remain, and I'm interested in new construction. What remains, and is there a limit on how much any individual school district can receive, and is there a limit in the number of times that they can apply? And then finally to that, what is the timeline from when they apply to when they'll hear an answer?
So we have about $1 million, just slightly over $1 million in new construction. And so even though we have these program funds, there's also going to be some program funds that are going to be reallocated from the high performance incentive grant that didn't get access to. So basically, at our next board meeting, we'll be reallocating all the program funds in the new construction area. So that answered your first question.
I was going to say, if that million's not spoken for, I got a little short list
there's
right here.
Plenty of projects that are really in what we call the health and safety projects that we still process. And so some of those program funds will be allocated to those projects. But then we also have those projects that are on that true unfunded list, as I mentioned, that came in before November 1st. And so program funds will be reallocated to those projects as well. So we tap out, as soon as we have the ability to reallocate those funds or monies that come back in the program, we quickly try to, again, address those projects that are waiting for bond authority. As far as your question, as far as how long does it take in order to get an approval, are you talking about just a state funding approval? Because there's a multi-phase process in order to access our program. So you have to actually get an approval from the Department of Education, and also have to have a approval for your plans from the Division of State Architects. So that's a condition of funding for our program. So you have to have those two approvals first before you can come through our line.
Assuming that you have your DSA approval and
your CDE approval.
Yes.
Yeah, it generally takes us about 120 days. It's a general rule, although, these are sometimes, because we have lack of workload currently right now with some of our program areas, it may take us a lot quicker for us to expedite some of those projects because we don't have that many applications in-house.
And is there a cap on how much any district can apply for? Is it once you've reached that number, you're done? Or
as long as you meet the eligibility requirements for the program, there is no cap.
Thank you. And Mr. Savage, many of the schools that we've worked on together sometimes have had issues around accessibility, meeting ADA requirements, ramps for students who use wheelchairs. Which of the funds that were described here today would be useful for those schools that need to make those types of renovations and modernizations?
It would be primarily the modernization funds that are available as part of the state program and coupled with the local match.
And the balance in the modernization fund?
There's virtually no money available in the modernization fund right now, and there's a backlog of projects on the two lists that we discussed. A significant amount of number of projects in line for funding already beyond the bond authority that we have available.